Our featured speaker today is on the board of directors of Kansas City Oasis. They have a shirt that looks suspiciously like ours, except they printed it backwards. Now, we have to go back and forth on this one. They thought the front was better. I thought the back. I don't know. We should have both options, right? Well, you know, the heck with dualistic thinking. So anyway, Brian is. You know, I've had the chance to, because I've been up there several times. This is Brian's first trip to Houston Oasis. First trip to Houston, actually, yeah. So, been trying to show him a good time. He'll be going out this afternoon to visit some friends in Dallas, but I said, hey, since you're in the area, why don't you come down and visit us? He's a native of Arkansas, a graduate of the University of Arkansas. What do you guys do? You don't do that. What do you, do you like the little hog thing? Okay, so, all right, he's a graduate of the University of Arkansas in lovely Fayetteville, Arkansas. He's just a wonderful human being, and I believe an up-and-coming voice in the secular community movement. Let's give a warm welcome to a first-time visit to Houston Oasis by Brian Carreno.
Thank you, everyone. Is this working?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, Mike stole like 5 of my jokes right off the bat, so this is going to be great. I'm so happy to be here. Okay, so first of all, I just want to apologize for this being so obnoxious, and by apologize, you're welcome. So a little bit story of how I got to be here. So back in April, I actually went and visited friends both in Austin and in Dallas. And immediately after getting back to Kansas City, I got a friendly, berating message that said, you should have come out to Houston. So that's why I'm here. Oh yeah, that's you, yeah. So that's why I'm here. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm righting my wrongs. I'm here for atonement, and thank you for your forgiveness. Yes. All right. So, as Mike said, I am on the board of directors for Kansas City Oasis. I also happen to work in the digital marketing field at a digital marketing agency in Kansas City. And when I told Mike that I was wanting to come out to Houston, he immediately was like, "Well, don't you want to talk?" I was like, "I mean, I guess, sure. I'll figure out something to come up with." And I went through my mind of different things that I could talk about, and I could absolutely 100% geek out on the marketing field and data and all that good stuff, but that's not what we're talking about today. Because since this is the first time that I'm meeting a lot of you, and the first time that a lot of you are meeting me, I thought I'd hit something a little bit more personal. So instead, we're going to talk about the 90s. I am that 90s kid. And this is going to be a totally awkward story. All right. First thing that I'd like to touch on, just a little bit about my background. Mike did touch on this as well. So this is a picture of me from the 90s. As you can tell, I had better hair back then. I know, I should bring that back. I don't understand what happened. So yeah, this was probably taken when I was around 3 or 4 years of age. And to give you a little bit more context, so I originally was born in Los Angeles to immigrant parents who moved up from El Salvador. They moved up probably late 80s, and then I came on the scene, 1990. You know, the big up-and-coming star that I am. And then when I was around 3 or 4, that's when we ended up moving to Northwest Arkansas, which is where I ended up growing up for most of my life. So I went to the University of Arkansas, like Mike said. I ended up studying journalism with a concentration in advertising and public relations. And then after college, because I know what I'm doing, I moved up to Kansas City, of all places. I didn't know anyone there, so that was a great move. And then somehow I ended up finding myself meeting Helen Stringer and everybody else who was starting up Kansas City Oasis. After that, Helen kind of asked me if I wanted to do a community moment, to which I said, yeah, sure, why not, because I'm easygoing like that. And then she said, well, do you want to MC? And I was like, yeah, sure, I guess, why not? And then she's like, oh, well then do you want to be on our board? And I was like, oh, okay. And so that's how I got to be on the board of Kansas City Oasis. That's my presentation, thank you. No, no, but like, so what ends up happening is I end up meeting people and I end up talking about Oasis, I end up talking about work, and one of the questions that I always get asked is what my age is. So the conversation typically goes like this: oh, how's it going, Brian? I'm like, oh, it's going great, how are you doing? Oh, great, what's your age? It just come out of nowhere. But yeah, no, and the reason is because I guess, and Mike said this the other night, he said that for whatever reason, I act a little bit more mature, which I don't think so, than my age group. And I've been able to do a lot of introspective thinking and realizing and kind of like looking at the universe, just like any other 90s kid. And so I ended up realizing that there are parallels between the 90s culture and life. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I hope that I can at least touch on something that you are familiar with. Do we have any 90s kids in here? Oh, we have 90s kids in here. All right, I'm gonna rely on you guys to be my hype crew. So anytime you see something that you recognize, give me like a woo. All right, it's already awkward. All right. So one of the things that ended up happening, I moved to Kansas City. Once again, I didn't know anybody. And I started to realize that a lot of what I thought I had known about myself kind of fell apart because I didn't know anyone. I didn't know anyone, nobody knew my inside jokes, nobody knew who I was, nobody knew anything about what I had studied. I ended up applying for jobs, and then because I didn't have any criteria from local agencies, people were like, I don't know who this kid is. So I ended up having a really hard time once I moved to Kansas City. But then I ended up making some friends, slowly but surely, making connections, and at one point I ended up sitting across the table at lunch from a good friend of mine, and I came to a realization that I was like, everything that I thought I knew is completely different, or at least maybe it is. And so what I ended up deciding to do is I ended up sitting down with a few friends of mine and just kind of had like an informal interview where I asked them different questions about life and their journeys and things that they've learned, and kind of pulled out different aspects that, that I found to be similar amongst everybody. So the first thing that I learned, and I think everyone can relate to this, is everyone has problems. I have problems, you have problems. If Oprah Winfrey was in here, she'd be giving problems out to everybody. So if you don't have any, she'd be giving them out. And as a 90s kid, there were different problems that I had than when I'm an adult. So one of the problems that I had as a 90s kid was this. I had a Nintendo NES and a Sega Genesis, and anytime that I wanted to play a game, it was like I had to give the game cartridges the breath of life in order for them to even be playable. So that was a problem I had in my 90s. Another problem that I had in the 90s, it was before DVRs, so I had to always be there in order to watch the 90s cartoons that I so enjoyed. Looking at this picture, I could probably name every single cartoon that's up here. It's insane. And another 90s problem that I had was keeping this thing happening. Oh, the memories. This is probably when I first realized that I probably should never have children. What do you mean you can't clean up after yourself? So everyone has problems, and problems, so these were my problems in the 90s, but now as an adult I have completely different problems. So I have to pay bills, I have to do the laundry, I have to then put the laundry away. Like I can't just leave things in piles anymore. I have to vacuum. Which reminds me that I left a whole bunch of things that I need to do once I get back. But there are different problems, and problems aren't always something that are tangible. So this next slide is a representation of problems that are things that we dealt with when we're younger that don't necessarily show up until you're older. So in this case, it's a problem that you didn't really realize in the 90s, and it wasn't until later in the early 2000s that you ended up realizing the problem that it was. And so I ended up realizing that not all problems are tangible. Not all problems are right there in front of you of having to pay rent, having to do bills. Sometimes those problems are the way that you grew up, the way that you learned things about yourself, the things that you were taught. And so at a certain point, when I was having these conversations, these interviews with friends, I started to realize that a lot of people had a lot of issues with self-worth and doubt and being able to value themselves, as did I. But the thing is, nobody talks about those problems. Everybody here is laughing because we all know that we all have problems, but then we don't want to talk about those problems because we're all ashamed of them. But it's worth reminding that everyone has problems, and then we're not actually alone in them. And that's one thing that I basically, one thing that I took away from all these conversations were that every person that I sat down with was all of a sudden just laying out all these different problems that they had. And I was like, man, I thought you had everything together. And in reality, you're just as damaged as I am. And there's a comfort that can be found in that. There's a comfort in the fact that knowing that you're not the only one who has problems. Which brings us to the next thing. The next thing that I learned is that everyone has failures. This is my favorite. You know, it's not just one thing to have something that you're trying to achieve. It's when you're trying to achieve something and then you absolutely 100% fail at it. I had friends who we started talking, and we started talking about life goals, and they told me, you know, I didn't think that this is where I would be. Or I always thought that I was going to be a basketball player. I personally, while I absolutely enjoy my job, journalism degree and the digital marketing space that I'm in are not necessarily the same thing. I'm not necessarily ashamed of it, but it's not necessarily the course that I initially thought. So everyone has failures. Some of the failures that we have in our 90s are getting through these books. I was terrible at these books. If you're not aware of these books, they're the Give Yourself Goosebumps series, which essentially is pick your own pathway, where you get to a certain point, you're presented like A or B, and if you choose A, go to page 35, if you choose B, go to page 39, and in either case, you're gonna lose. I was never good at these books. The other thing, going back to the Sega Genesis that I had, I was terrible at Sonic the Hedgehog, although I absolutely loved it. And you know what's probably worse is these game systems didn't have a way for you to save things, so as soon as you failed, you have to start all over from the beginning. Exactly. There were no checkpoints, no start, like you failed, you have to start all over. So I was terrible at that, and that brought a whole bunch of failures in my early 90s that seemed really simple, really just childish, and then there's failures that you end up kind of running into as an adult. And just like problems, it's comforting to know that everybody else has failures, and that at the same time, in that moment, we feel like this is the end of everything, but we're able to persevere and kind of get past it, and it's kind of a little bit more comforting to know that other people have had the same thing. But another thing beyond just simply recognizing that just like everybody else, you have failures, they have failures, is also recognizing that different people view failures differently or have different kinds of failures. So a good example of this is going to be Legends of the Hidden Temple. So this was a show that I watched in the 90s, and if you're not familiar with it, essentially they took kids and then they sent them through an obstacle course, kind of like American Ninja, and at the end they had to collect these different pieces, and at the end they have to construct this idol. And I remember being a 90s kid and just thinking, I understand how they're not able to do this. There's three pieces. There's a base, there's a body, and there's a head. It's pretty easy for me to understand how those things are supposed to go together. But at the same time, like, if you're in the moment and you're trying to rush through things and you're trying to do everything, like some things that are super simple to you when you have all the time in the world is not as easy for somebody else. And so it's important for us to realize that it's not only that everybody has failures, that I have failures, you have failures, but it's to also recognize that when you're looking at somebody else's failure, that's their personal failure. And to them, that is something that's sensitive. And while you might be thinking, oh, well, I don't understand why your relationship's crumbling. I have a wonderful relationship. Like, at the same time, you have to realize, well, to them, it's something personal and it's something different. And while you might not have the same issues with that particular item, it's not your place to then end up seeing it through your lens. It's your place to see it through their lens and to see exactly where they're coming from. So, all right, getting through these awkward pieces. So we're going to go to the next part, which is a little bit more lighthearted than the rest, and that's that I learned that everyone has a purpose. So this is the part where we can start. Like, I know, here's the thing, is like, when I wrote this, I was like, oh man, I'm so good at this, like, I know everything about life now. But the thing is, when it comes to purpose, and it comes to life, is like, that we don't necessarily know what our purpose is, because, for example, when I was a little kid, I thought I was going to be a Beetleborg when I grew up. I was with a group of individuals the other night, and we were talking about the Power Rangers and everything that happened with the Power Rangers, the entire plot line and everything. But this was what I was watching. It only lasted like 2 seasons, but I always wanted to be a Beetleborg. And as a little kid, I knew that I was going to be one when I grew up. That was my purpose in life. We went to the store. I saw like the games and the toys and like the little laser machine guns, and I told my parents, I'm like, you need to buy me those because I can't fulfill this if I don't have that laser gun to help me. And I don't know if any of you have watched these since you were a little kid, but the plot lines are ridiculous now. Like, you watch these and it's like, the bad guy, he's throwing eggs at people's cars, we need to like suit up and go fight the bad guys. I'm like, wow, if crime fighting was that easy. Like, but, yeah. But then the thing is, like, I grew up, obviously, and then I realized I'm not going to be a Beetleborg. I'm not going to be a superhero. I know, right? Super sad. But when I sat with my friends, and they were telling me about their life stories, I noticed the same thing from every single person. Each of them had an initial thought that they had, this is my purpose, this is what I'm going to be. So some people wanted to be basketball players, and then they grew up and they're like, well, this isn't going to happen for me. Some people thought that they were going to be great authors, and that's not happening for them either. Some people wanted to be ballerinas, and then they ended up having an accident, and now they can't do that. So how do we figure out what's going on with life and how we're supposed to approach it? Well, one thing that I realized is sometimes things change. So these orange VHS tapes are what I used to watch everything on. I remember watching the Rugrats movie, which is not this one right here, but I ended up watching the Rugrats movie on repeat over and over and over and over again until the tape was no longer usable. But naturally, just like I said, things change. So things changed from using VHS to now being DVDs. Ooh, shiny, literally. Yeah, and now they're streaming. Right, but we're talking about 90s, so this happened in the 90s. Streaming didn't come till later. You're jumping ahead. But yeah, no, so things change, and sometimes our identities change. So sometimes we consider ourselves part of one group. And then later we grow up and we realize, no, we're our own person. Yeah, everybody likes that one. Yeah? So, we have to realize that sometimes it's not always black and white, unlike, JT right there. Our purpose changes, or the things that we're going after change. And for me, I ended up sitting down with one individual, and I initially started asking him all the questions, like, have you ever had failure? Have you ever dealt with depression and things like that? I tried to be like Diane Sawyer in that case. It's just like, let me just ask you these questions like a real person. And then he just ended up cutting me short, and he's like, no, let's just get to the chase and let's talk about the real item. And so he ended up telling me a story. I don't know the details because I'm not into sports. So I'm gonna paraphrase a lot of it, but you'll get the gist. So essentially there was a case where there was a famous tennis ball player, and she, nationally and internationally, was always ranking second place. And so her coach, who was unable to actually get through to her, decided to reach out to this third organization to say, hey, can you help her figure out what's the roadblock that's happening here? Why is she not able to progress? So she ends up walking into this particular organization, and they end up having a conversation, and the question that they ask is, why do you play tennis? And she ended up responding, she's like, well, I want to win, I want to be number one, I just want to be the best. And so the person who's helping her then ends up turning around to the whiteboard and ends up drawing a tombstone. Very morbid, huh? And on the tombstone ends up writing, was the best, like, nobody could beat her, things like that. And she looked at him and thought, this is ridiculous. This is dumb. Why are you doing this? And so he's like, well, these are the things that you say are most important to you. These are the things that you say are the things that, the reasons why you're playing tennis. So this is what we're going to put on your tombstone. She's like, no, I'm not handling this. And she ends up walking out. So the very next day, the individual who's helping her ends up calling her coach and ends up telling her, I'd really like for her to take time to just kind of think through those questions. And she ends up coming back later, happy as can be, and walks into the room and says, I finally figured out why I play tennis. It's not because I want to be the best. It's not because I want to be number one, but it's because I want to be sunshine. And so they ended up writing sunshine, but they didn't really understand, so they asked her to explain. And she's like, well, I play tennis because I want to be sunshine. I want to be a light for people who don't think that they can make it. I want to be, I don't necessarily want to be the best for myself, but I want to be the best so that other people can see that you can achieve things that you put effort into. So when everyone has a purpose, it's not necessarily about your end goal as far as like, I want to be at a Beetleborg, or I want to be a ballerina, or I want to be a basketball player. When it comes to purpose in life, it's what at your core is the thing that drives you through everything. So for me, my purpose in life is to bring joy into this world. I love making people laugh. I absolutely enjoy it, and I personally don't feel that I've fulfilled my purpose in life if I don't make at least one person laugh a day. I have candy bowls at my desk at work. I have tea bags that I have so that people who just need a break can come by. And I frequently try to be as witty as possible. Sometimes I fail. Just to bring that joy and bring that moment of kind of comfort into people's lives, because I understand what it's like to not have joy, and so my purpose in life is to bring joy into this world. And so essentially going through everything that I've gone through and kind of looking retroactively and talking to those different people, I've been able to kind of see that once you figure out the certain things that end up driving you, it doesn't necessarily matter what problems you have. It doesn't necessarily matter what failures you have. At the end of the day, if you can focus on what you ultimately want to achieve, whether it be you want to be the richest person alive, or you want to bring sunshine into this world, or you want to bring joy into this world, if you focus on those things, then those problems tend to melt away. I ended up spilling coffee on myself this morning, and I was like, I mean, if that's the worst that's going to happen today, then it's really not that bad. So those are the things that I have learned about my life journey. Those are the things that I have come to appreciate about growing up in the 90s. Thank you, everyone, for allowing me to go through this awkward journey. I would do Q&A, but I guess I don't really know what Q&A would look like. I can tell you about the 90s even more. One thing that I did want to touch on, when I talked about my immigrant parents, I could touch on that, but there's actually a really cool video on Kansas City Oasis YouTube page where I actually talked about growing up to immigrant parents. So feel free to check that out, as well as feel free to check out all of the Kansas City Oasis videos online. You can follow me on Twitter, although you might not want to. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you for giving me your time.